random talk is the idea of the ijaz of the Quran, or the inimitability of the Quran. Now, Imam Suyuti, I'm sure you've been online and you've seen those scientific miracles of the Quran. And I'm not saying there aren't any scientific miracles from the Quran, but you're a fool if you try to hedge your bet for the Quran, the scientific miracles. The science is fluid, discipline. What's the miracle today is tomorrow's folly or blunder. So it's best not to base your faith on that. Muslims that love, I think Muslims have woke up from their colonial period and they love science, whatever. So, but the real inimitability of the Quran ijaz is what Imam Suyuti is talking about in Itqan. He talks about the ijaz, but he talks about the concept of ijaz first is what? I don't know. Well, ajz in Arabic means to be weak or incapable. And ajuz is an old woman, for example. Their health is low, their strength is low. So the ijaz, or a mu'jiza, is the evidentiary miracle. And the ijaz of the Quran, according to Imam Suyuti, he says, "Ibn al-mu'jiza amrun khariqun ada, makrunun bit-tahaddi, salamun an al-mu'arada, wa hiya imma hissiyya wa imma aqliyya." A mu'jiza, he says, a evidentiary miracle is an affair which is the breaking of customary occurrences. That is appendix with a challenge, and something which is free from being opposed. It's either something hissy that you perceive to your senses, or something intellectual. أكثر معجزات بني إسرائيل كانت حسية. He said most of the mu'jizat of the Bani Israel were these occurrences physically, that you would perceive. But he mentions here that the mu'jizat of the Quran is an intellectual one. The Quran is not a burning bush, a staff that splits the sea, fire that doesn't burn, nothing like that. It's right here, in front of you, right here. The book you can put in your backpack and take to work with you. That's all it is. It's something so it's innocuous in a way. We think of, the miracle is that big thing. A Cecil B. DeMille movie. Joe that splits, right? Or Prince of Egypt, that Walt Disney production. Huh? That's what we think. But that's not what the Quran is. The Quran is not that as a mu'jiza. It is an intellectual miracle. Of course, that then leads the Muslim then with the whole science thing, the whole science spiel. The Quran is full of embryology and all that stuff. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm not going to approach it that way. So in the Quran, there's a thing called we call the tahaddi, the challenge. كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة مثله. If you are in doubt concerning that which we revealed to our slave Muhammad, then prove the surah like it. That's the challenge. Some people say it's not a challenge, but it's a rhetorical style. But the most scholars call it the tahaddi, the challenge. Bring it on! Bring it on! And let's talk about that. Well, I mentioned ajz or mu'jiza is incapacity, weakness, breaking up of adat or customary and commonly perceived occurrences. In Al-Bidayah fi Usul ad-Din, it's a classical medieval text on basic beliefs. The idea of a khabar sadiq or a true narrative. The second type of true narrative is knowledge supported by the evidentiary miracle originating from the prophet. So, we all believe in the Eiffel Tower. We've never been there because it comes to mass transmission. I believe there's a place called Antarctica because I've never been there, but I believe it exists. I believe there's also a planet called Mars. I've never been there either. Okay? So there's a lot of evidence of mass transmission information that confirms the existence of these places. That's a type of getting khabar sadiq, through mass transmission. But from the Muslim theological perspective, another source of true information is a prophet. A prophet is an individual, but his khabar, is what he informs you, is with sidq, with truthfulness. But he needs a secondary, experiential, evidentiary proof for his validity. That's the mu'jiza. Okay? That's a classical theological approach towards that. The Quranic ijaz, or the Quranic inimitability, the status of the Quran as being something unique, is that it represents the most eloquent and concise way of saying what it says. The miracle of the Quran is in its, I want to use that word, in its usage, in its language that it presents. And when you read Suyuti's work here, he gives a lot of these bits of information. It's just amazing. So we're going to actually go in, I'm going to go into this in detail on the Islamophobia 3. Okay? I will. I think that it deserves it. But let me tell you, I have here Quran as a living pan-historical manifestation of divine speech, that which defies Arabic style and eloquence. Okay? So that's the first thing is, a miracle, you cannot prove a miracle. Now this is what Bar Ehrman says. Because a miracle, according to Bar Ehrman, is the most improbable thing that could ever occur. Because what's a miracle? It's the breaking of customary occurrences. Water from your fingers. Walking on water. Huh? A giant camel. I mean, these things, so since they almost never have occurred, and a historian can only go back with probably understanding what happened in the past without certitude. You know, of course, you know, say I know a lot. We can find a lot about Bill Clinton. There's a lot of information, newsreels, photographs about Bill Clinton, tapes. We can get a good understanding of the historical Bill Clinton. I can get some more information on Abraham Lincoln, not as much as Bill Clinton. And there are so many human beings on this planet who've come and gone, their names aren't even known, except the God and angels. They were, they're not here anymore. So the further back you can go in time, so when you talk about a miracle, a burning bush, well, if you weren't there, you missed out. That's the thing about miracles. If you're not there, you miss out. But from the Islamic perspective, Muhammad ﷺ's miracle must be ever present. Because if it's not present, there is no evidentiary case to support his claim to prophethood. Because all you got are reports that he claimed he was a prophet. Narrative. Historical narratives. I wasn't there when the palm tree wept. And I wasn't there when water came from his blessed fingers. I wasn't there at Khandaq when he split that stone, the sparks flew out towards Yemen and towards Byzance and towards Iran. I wasn't there. I've just been told it happened. Maybe it didn't really happen. Okay? Yeah, I mean, of course, always eyewitnesses of the resurrection, but hey. But, so that's why the Quran has to be a pan-historical event, a constant, present thing. Therefore, it can't just be something hissy, like a burning bush that goes out eventually. It has something, that's why it's an intellectual one. It has something which is intellectual. But being an intellectual miracle is what confounds people. Because why? Because that's what they expect a miracle to be in the first place. They want the big pizzazz. It's just another book on the shelf. How can that be a miracle? If it levitated, that'd be cool. You know? If it moved by itself, that's cool. So what's this? A book among books? How can it be a miracle, man? That's what dumbfounds people, you see. They say, oh, Muhammad had no miracle. That's what we have to ask ourselves, is it a mu'jiza? And of course, to be able to ascertain that, you have to use your intellect. Because it's an akli miracle. It's akli. So if your intellect is deficient, you're not going to get it. And on this, I mean this. You're going to have to approach the miracle with the capacity to measure its ijaz, its inimitability. And that's only one measure. That's Arabic. And that's what God has preserved it for you, you see. You have a living language that survives even today. Now some people say, well, that ijaz of the Quran as a linguistic text was only for the first Arabs. I say poppycock to that. Very, very poppycockish, right? I'm not very British. I'm not British. Though I may be Welsh. The point is, I don't believe that to be the case. Because if that's the case, then it's not really a miracle for any of us. It's the same as a miracle in the past that we have no reference to. Because hey, if it can't be for me now, doesn't mean I can intellectually engage in to ascertain, to explain it. That's why I want to spend the third lecture on that, because I have to really work that one out. And the only way I can work it out is by working with you on some examples of it in the Quran. And that takes us to sit down and looking at verses of the Quran and understanding the rules of Arabic rhetoric and taking this text apart. But I'm going to give you a couple of them right now. I'm going to give you a couple that you can think about. Now remember, that means that we have to define ummi. Why does it mean to be ummi? I haven't defined that yet, because that's the claim. He's a man who's unlettered. If he was a poet or something like that, then he's all right. Remember, like Abu Sufyan is asking the question. He's asked the question by Heracles in Syria. Does this man claim a kingdom? Were any of his ancestors kings or not? So he might be claiming a kingdom again. No. He asked him these questions to try to eliminate this guy's, Muhammad's claim to prophet. No, is he trying to get something out of it? Is he trying to get money out of it, women out of it? What is he? No, we offered him beautiful women, he didn't want them. We offered him to make him our king, he didn't want that. They try to eliminate the immediate, probable reasons he wants leadership, prophethood. And then they look into the other reasons that might be. He doesn't want to be a king, he doesn't want women, perhaps he's just crazy, perhaps he's a poet, perhaps he's possessed. Those are more obscure and secondary reasons that we might approach. So I have here then two types of called bada'il Quran. The things, the bada'a means to be bright and brilliant, right? In Turkey, Badi'u Zaman Nursi, Said Nursi, because Badi'u Zaman, bada'a means to be luminal. So he's the wonder of the age, is his title in Turkey. Okay? Said Nursi. So the Bada'il Quran, the wondrous, brilliant things of the Quran. And he's got heaps of them in here, man. But if you don't know the rules of Arabic rhetoric, you don't understand what he's talking about. So I'll give you a couple. One's called ilaful lafz ma'a lafz, agreement of word with word. Okay? Or the synchronicity of a word with a word. Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Yusuf, وَتَوَلَّ عَنْهُمْ وَقَالَ يَا أَسْفَ عَلَى يُوسُفَ. So he's talking about, Yaqub is talking about his son, right? He turned from them. وَقَالَ يَا أَسْفَ. Oh, woe is me, right? عَلَى Yusuf, in regards to Yusuf. وَأَبْيَضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ. His eyes became white. Min huzn, from sadness. فَهُوَ قَدِيم. And inside he was anger. He held his anger inside. The next verse. Qala. He said, they said, Tala تَفْتَعُوا تَذْكُرُوا يُوسُفَ حَتَّى تَكُونُوا حَرَضًا وَأَتُكُونُ مِنَ الْحَالِكِينَ. This phrase here, he said to his father, and this is interesting. This narrative here is that Yusuf is sad. He has huzn. That's the preceding phrase. And he's very upset. Woe is me. Right? And then he says, the narrative says, Talahi. Talahi. What's this ta there? Ta. What's that ta? Takasa. We learned that in Arabic, right? Have you ever heard it used in your life? Never have heard it used. Talahi. You say wallahi? Sure. Wallahi. That's so common. Wallahi. But talahi, never. But in certain Yusuf it's used by Allah. Talahi. So it's an obscure, rare letter of oath making. It's almost never used in Arabic. It's very obscure. Then Allah says, Tafta'u. What does tafta'u mean in Arabic? Tafta'u. Well, you might hear the Arabic tazalu. Tazalu means to continue something. Usually with the present tense verb. This verb in Arabic is very rare. Tafta'u. It means tazalu in Arabic. It means that which is, it means to continue an act. By Allah, He continued. Tafta'u tazku. By Allah, you continue to remember. This is what his son is saying to Yaqub. The Arabic here, this phrase is very rare Arabic. Because each word used here is a very rare occurrence, almost never used in Arabic. But they're all combined here in this one statement. Okay, he says, Talahi tafta'u tadhkuru Yusufa hatta takunu haradan. And so, the first thing is the uses of ta. Ta here is very rare, as an oath. The second one is the rare word tafta'u, which means tazalu. There are other ways more common to have said this, but why like this? And then he said, hatta takunu harad. What does harad mean? Well, it says, the verse is, al takuna min al halakin, or you'll be of those who destroy them. Halaka means to be destroyed. But harada is the idea of being internally broken due to huzn. But it's a very rare word in Arabic. It has a very specific meaning. In a state of huzn, which is already mentioned in the previous verse, min al-huzn, you can enter a state of harab. And that means that you have internal brokenness out of huzn. So this verse is very unusual. That each of the words used here that are important are words in Arabic that Arabs almost never ever use. But extremely appropriate for Yaqub. Because that's the one thing about Yaqub as a prophet is his relationship with his son Yusuf. They have a relationship like that. He's the only person who goes blind because of the sadness of missing his son. And the language of the Quran is so precise to emphasize that it uses in this simple ayat a series of a preposition and the auxiliary verb and a noun, which are very rarely, almost ever used in Arabic. But they all emphasize the state of Yaqub. And the Prophet was so creative. This is one of the things. If you don't know Arabic well, you'll read all that, never got that at all. That's a type what's called ilaful lafs ma'alafs. Another one is the idea of iktisas. Iktisas is the idea of exactness. So what do I have here for that one? In Surah Ghafir, the Prophet says, in the narration, وَيَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ يَوْمَ التَّنَادِ. It's the word tanad here, tanad. He says to his people, "Oh my people, I fear for you Yawma tanad." Tanad. Yawma tu'luna mudbirin. The day you turn your backs. Now, this idea of iktisas is that one word is used in the Quran, like this word ittinan. But in other places in the Quran, its full meaning is explained, but you don't catch it. You have to really think about it. Because the word tanad has a double meaning. Tanad. The first one is the idea of nida. So Allah is describing Yawm al-Qiyam as Yawm al-Tanad, Yawm al-Tanad. Ever heard that one before? Yawm al-Tanad or Yawm al-Qiyam? No, you never heard of it, have you? It's in the Quran. It's right here. The first is that in this verse, from Surah Al-Ghafir, verse number 34, I believe, and verse verse 40. The first meaning of Tanad, you can understand it from Surah Al-Araf, verse 44. وَنَادَى أَصْحَابُ الْجَنَّةِ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. On the day of judgment, the people of Jannah will call out the people of hellfire. Nada. The idea of calling out. That's the first thing about this Tanad. It means to call out. The day of shouting out. And that's mentioned in the Quran. It's the day when they will call out. And the other is Surah Abasa, verse 34. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ مَرْءٌ مِنْ أَخِيهِ is the day when a person will flee from his brother. So what does Tanad mean also? It means what? It means to turn your back on each other. All in that one word. So this is a very unusual word. Well, the Quran itself explains it totally in other places. In relationship to the Yawm al-Qiyamah, it's a day of calling out and a day of turning back on one another. And it's all bound in that one word, Tanad. And you won't even find this word Tanad anywhere. Look for it. It's a hard word to find, the meaning of it. And to think that Muhammad was sitting there, trying to choose his words very carefully. This is the idea of iktisas, where you can find word relationships, a word in the Quran, where its true meaning can be explained in other verses where you don't realize it's being explained. And he goes on and on, this book right here, page after page of these type of issues with the Quran. And to think, and we'll do that in the number, the third talk on Islamophobia. I want to go through these in detail. I want to pick them out and let you see these things and think about it. Now, it may not be a miracle. It may not be anything for anyone. You're like, oh, it doesn't prove anything to me. But it comes down to the Muslim claim that the Quran's going to say, okay, well then, let's look at this Quran problematically. Take it apart. Kick it. A lot of other things we can talk about. There are issues we want to talk about, for example, the claim that the Quran has grammatical errors in it. I'll look at those. Some of those claims. We'll look at more of these. The concept of ijaz. These issues of the style of the Quran. Its precision. And thirdly, we'll talk about those points where the Quran has claimed that it has extra Quranic sources for some of its stories. We'll look at those and draw some understandings. But the idea of the ijaz is one that we really need to be able to understand. The problem is that at the end of the day, it will probably increase you in faith. How do you share that with someone else? I'm not quite sure. Okay? I suppose if it increases you in faith, it'll increase you in your good deeds, and maybe your good character will be what wins people over. Not a discussion on Quranic grammatical, avenues of discussion. Because at the end of the day, it's you being a good person that convinces people that your faith is worth anything, I think, at the end of the day. And then the last thing is I want to cover are, prophetic miracles. One of the things about the problem is that I mentioned already today is that the prophet had no, why is this miracles, Jesus walking on water, healing the sick, making the blind see. Wow, lots of narrative on that. Well, the thing is, did the prophet Muhammad have similar? So we have this interesting, what is that mathematically? Shared, oh look, nothing on the board.
Overheated shit, so we gotta use this one.
Overheated, how do you know that?
History.
I mean, I've been talking, no one's told me this?
Well, as soon as you heard it.
I feel my voice going on and on. Droning away. Prophetic miracles. Shadows. Two engineers working hard away. Okay, well anyway, one of the points that is brought up is that did Muhammad work miracles? And And of course, we know in our tradition that these are there. But I think it's good that, you know, Christians like to bring up that Jesus did all these miracles, and that's a proof that he's God or something like that. Of course, the Muslims don't. We argue case, well, you know, it's not maybe a proof of anything, you know. It may be a proof that that God's with him in some way, but it doesn't make you God. But one of the big things that Christians would say that Jesus must be God is that he controls the natural forces. That's the one I've heard about. So when Jesus can walk on water, things like that, only, you know, how can, or Jesus can calm the storm. Well, only God can control natural forces, right? Shh, didn't forget. So in the Islamic tradition, then, miracles then there are things of Jesus that were Jesus-y, kinds of miracles, Christic miracles, like animation of the dead, you know, which is mentioned in the gospel accounts. There are shared ones like water miracles, healing miracles, nature miracles, increase in food miracles. They both have. And then there are inanimate objects and future events. Now, I think there are future events for Jesus, but I don't remember any right offhand, so I didn't put it over there. So anyway, I got tired. After doing so long working on the car, researching stuff, you know, I got tired. So I did. But let's look at some of these miracles of Jesus. Healing. Mark 8:22, Jesus goes and then the blind man, he took the blind man by the hand, led him outside the village. Then he spat on the man's eyes and put his hands on him. Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him on, saying, don't even go into the village. Nature. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and was completely calm. Okay? Increase in food. "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." And of course, the very famous of the little loaves and fishies, and he feeds all the people. You know these stories if you read the Bible or gone to church when you were forced to as a kid. Okay? No problem there. What about the Prophet ﷺ? Healing Muhammad ﷺ. These are the references there. Sa'd ibn Waqqas, a servant and military commander of God's messenger, commander-in-chief of the army that conquered Persia during Umar's caliphate, and one of the 10 commands. Wow, the names were there. I was beside God's messenger during the battle of Uhud. He shot arrows at unbelievers until his bow was broken, after which he began to give his arrows to me. Each time he gave, and then Qatada ibn Numan was hit and one of his eyeballs protruded. God's messenger used his hand to replace the eyeball in his socket. The eye healed at once, as if nothing had happened, and became even better than the other one. Ali, now I know that all these are like war, you know, that's maybe not good because it's a conflict miracle, you know. It's not like walking in the streets of, you know, Nazareth healing people in the marketplace, you know, maybe a jihad or something like that. But hey, that's Islamic history. I can't change that, mashallah. So, you know, if you have a problem with that, sorry, if it's not politically correct. If it's not a politically correct healing or whatever you want to say. Ali, who was suffering greatly from sore eyes, was appointed standard bearer in the battle of Khaybar. The pain ceased when the messenger of God applied his healing saliva. Same thing as Jesus, putting healing saliva, man. And his irons became much better. Next morning, Ali joined the battle, pulling up the citadel's heavy iron gate and using it as a shield to conquer the stronghold of Khaybar, mashallah. In the same battle, Salama ibn Aqwa's leg wound was healed when God's messenger breathed upon it. Wow. Sorry. This is when the crowd goes crazy at the masjid, right? I don't know. I call it the spirit of deception. Then this is nature from Sharik ibn Abdullah ibn Amr that he heard Anas mention that one day Juma, a man entered the door opposite the minbar. This is of the rain. When it rained it rained, the Prophet raised, "Oh Allah, give us rain, give us rain, give us rain," and it rained for so long, and then they had to go back to the Prophet to stop the rain. So here. So they got more than they bargained for. The idea that the Prophet was able to call to Allah and invoke rain. And it rained. Like Jesus, saying, "Be still." And some might say, but Jesus said be still. He said be still. So I would say, that's all right. It's not a problem with Jesus saying be still. Or Muhammad's been raising the old law, here, and pointing his finger. Is that we have these apparent men who are able to control natural forces that most of us can't do.
No, but in the way like Jesus did it, he sort of like commanded it. I think this is why the Christians believe it so, because he commanded it himself, and for this place he asked God to do it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that might be an argument in favor of them, but I would say, at the same time, we read this. I don't know the next narration. I mean, that might be. I have to think about that. How I would respond to that. There are other narratives of that, but just taking this right here, I think that it's not really problematic when it comes to the fact that the fact is that men, whether they're either saying, you know, either in a biblical narrative, quiet, be still, or calling on Allah to do it, at the end of the day, it would have been very surprising for the observer, however it was happening, that a person, however he said it, has command. Because the first thing you don't do is you don't assume, I mean, if you were a Jew, or around the Prophet or something, you don't, when someone has that command over nature, I'm not quite sure, immediately you come out walking away, especially if you were a Jew, assuming that man was God. I mean, that's not your first thing that comes to your mind. Well, he must be God, you know. I mean, especially if you were a Jew. Now, you might be a pagan Arab, maybe. But a Jew, I probably wouldn't think that. So if Jesus being maybe the way it's worded like that, I don't think his onlookers would have first come to that. But anyway, I think about that. I'll think about that. You have a good point, Robin. Thank you. Other ones would be increase in food, and there are all these narrations about the Prophet feeding lots of people. You know lots of them here. During the feast of the Prophet's marriage to Zainab, Sulaim, Anas' mother, fried a few handfuls of dates, and Anas was taken to the Prophet, fried dates. He did so and was told, go and invite so-and-so, naming some people, and whoever was over there. Anas did so and was told, and gradually about 300 companions came. And so all these people ate. So we have lots of these, feeding a lot of people from a small amount of food in the Hadith literature. That's important for us. Water, there were three of them, and then these are the narrations, of course, all these are narrations of the battle, where people are watered. I saw water from his fingers like a fountain. All 300 people performed wudu with that water and drank from it. All 1,500 people drank from it and filled their water bags. The Prophet performed wudu from a leather water bag, a qirba, then dipped his hand into it. I saw water flow from his fingers like a fountain. All 1,500 people drank from it and filled their water bags. So you have these type of things you can share with people.
If you thought about that in a scientific term, like the water fluid sprayer, like couldn't that be like in constantly like sweating through his I don't know. I'm just thinking because he's the prophet and
Only one person knows that.
But his sweat would be like
Well, I think that if it was sweat, then people probably would have noticed that it was sweat.
I know, but it's like if you think it was a prophet's sweat, I wouldn't be like, the prophet's sweat.
Yeah,
would be like,
but the prophet from sweat, we know nutrition smelled like perfume, so they would have noticed the smell of it. Good one, I'm
That's why
trying.
you're the ship.
That's why I'm the sheikh, and you're my devil's advocate. You're my sidekick, Baba. So we were talking today about going, so my wife gave me permission to go on Umrah, but if I take Alma with me. Would you agree to go? To Umrah?
She said if I go, I'd be going to Africa as well.
Yeah.
If I get to see lions, sure.
So I think we're going to go then. I can imagine him around the Kaaba. I think we can run watching the Kaaba if you like.
I just keep looking for the stone, man. I mean, like,
You don't see an argument with the people there.
But you know, like, if we have the black stone and we could see to heaven, couldn't, like,
Where did you get that from? It's like the.
don't you look in the stone and see heaven? Don't you see a glimpse of
That's
heaven?
like a. That's like.
But don't you look in the stone and see a glimpse of heaven? A glimpse of heaven. Don't you see that? Or what do you see when you look? That's what I was told. That's what I
When you
was.
get to them, what you see.
Huh?
When you get to them, what you see.
But what was like you're supposed to see them with the
I don't think you're supposed to see anything, but you may see something. Join the club. I'm confused too.
So what are,
I drive with you in the night, don't worry about it. Inanimate objects. There are to be narratives, I don't know if any Jesus is an inanimate object type of miraculous occurrences, but in Muslim we could hear God, we could hear food glorifying God, eating with message of the law. The stones in the Prophet's hand, he put some pebbles in his hand and they begin to glorify Allah. He placed them in Abu Bakr's hand and they began to glorify. And Abu Dhar reports that God's messenger then put the pebbles in the hands of Omar and Uthman successively, and they continued the glorification. Both Anas and Abu Dhar add that God's messenger finally put the pebbles in their hands, after which the pebbles stopped their glorification. Oh man. I mean, what would you have felt like? It's like, what's wrong with us? You know? You know? But that may be a sign of what? What do you think that might be a sign of? Those pebbles glorifying in Abu Bakr, Omar, and Uthman. What's that a sign of, you think?
Khilafah.
Huh? The Khilafah. Because it's in their Khilafah that they become the most perfect prophetic followers. They fulfill the ultimate prophetic role of being judge and leader of the people, literally. And so, yeah, well, that's a different discussion. And then Ibn Abbas narrates about the idols falling over when the Prophet points them and recites the Quran. You know, so these are things that you might want to take and share with your Christian friend who says, hey, you know, what about those miracles? And we'll say, well, yeah, what about them? But remember, if you've not seen it yourself, it's just a story about something happened in the past.
even though you could just say like any miracle done by anyone, like you could say that miracle straight away. Any miracle done by anyone could just be like magic or like illusion, because back then people could have just like thought that was like, you know, anything.
It very well could be.
So like it just didn't there between you and your friend, you just conclude miracles out. Forget miracles for a moment, because it could be anything because you can't prove it.
We you know, we're not going to go back and relive this. So.
And even if we did, it could still be like an illusion, like magicians do.
You know, it's the story of Pharaoh and his people.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
the future events. The prophet announced in the pulpit and the president's commands, my grandson Hassan is the only one. Through him, God will reconcile two large hosts. 4 years later, when the two largest Muslim armies faced each other, Hassan made peace with Muawiyah and closed prediction. He also has wives. One of you will be led a serious rebellion. Many around her will be killed, and the dogs of Hawab will bark at her. These were proved by Ali's battles against Aisha, Talha, and Zubair during the Battle of the Camel, against Muawiyah at Sifan, and against the Kharijites at Harura and Nahrawan. The Messenger of Allah told his daughter Fatima, you will be the first family member to join me after my death. When she then died 6 months later. His words proved true. He said to Abu Dhar, you will be expelled from here, Medina, will live alone and die alone, and that's what happened. Sayyidina Omar kicked him out of the city, that he was a troublemaker. Because he kept telling people that... Nothing, Omar.
What did he tell the people?
He took a little equipment to being so, you know, living up high off the hog. You know, the Prophet lived a very simple life. Why do people live so well? He was going around emphasizing that, and it was hard on the people. You know. And then once he woke up in Haram's house as Man's aunt and said with a smile, I dreamed that my community was fighting in the sea like kings sitting on thrones. Haram asked, pray that I may be with them. He replied firmly, you shall be. 4 years later, she accompanied her husband Ubadah bin Samit during the conquest of Cyprus. That meant she had to travel on the ship to get to Cyprus. She died there, and her tomb remains a visited place. Hard to explain those. Anyway, not hard if he's a prophet. The other recourse is these are all made-up stories, post-event stories, so some people might allege, hey, if you don't want to believe, you don't want to believe at the end of the day, right? References, there you go. I got some references, you can get those later if you want. And the next two lectures will be responses to Sharia and Islamic law, jihad, women, jizya, all those things, the dhimmihud and all that. And then number 3 is criticisms of the Quran, internal inconsistency, external sources, the ijaz of the Quran in more detail. You have any suggestions for, like, for example, if you'd like to have a class on hadith sciences where you want maybe more discussion on this whole thing about hadith, maybe an idea of lafzi versus manawi, literal verbal hadith versus meaning versus literal transmission word by word. Those are things that are relevant for us.
How about you make a lecture about the God and science?
God and science. I don't know. So those are things that, we have planned. I haven't got dates for these. If you are interested in looking at these, just go to our Facebook page. You just go on, what's the responses to Islamophobia, right? And you go to that Facebook page, and we'll put up the new dates for these upcoming lectures. And we also have some of the classes coming up. The mention about the breakdown of the ritual prayer. These classes are going to start, I think, December. We thought next week, but I think next week after that, December 17th. So all that stuff will be on responses to some of the jobs up there, and also my website if you're interested. Anyway, that's it. What I wanted to share with you. Any questions? Yes.
Earlier you said it was, based on different Christian or Muslim understandings of certain concepts, it's tougher than one would think to speak to a Christian and sort of try to find common ground. So, would a valid argument kind of be like the Muslim vision of perfection versus maybe the Christian vision? Like, for example, like they're always talking about Jesus was this God of love and peace and things like that. But we've seen from what you just told us that there are different facets to Muhammad's Islam, and that that contributes to his perfection. There's a time where he kind of held himself back, and there's a time where he kind of took action. And then we see on our version of the second coming of Christ that Isa alayhi salam he'll kill pigs and burn crosses, and he'll kill the Dajjal. That sounds rather violent compared to what the Christian idea of Jesus is. So can we say that this violent aspect it's not just in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it's in anybody who's sort of following his law, and that's part of its perfection?
I think I think that if you want to know what Jesus is violently do is just read Jesus and all those Old Testament statements, and you've got a lot of violence there. You don't need to. You can go back in time to get those theologically. As for the fake tradition about the breaking of the cross and the slaying of swine, I believe that's more of an understanding of things that we've done by Isa Islam that. I don't think Jesus is going to go around and have all the crosses broke. It doesn't seem very much what's intended there. But that if it's an event that's done that way, that it's a sign that there was an error attributed to him. 2 errors. The idea of crucifixion and what it implied, and the second one was the abrogation of sacred law. Because the prophet says that when he'll come back, he will, like he said about Musa, if Musa came back, he would have to be obedient to what God gave me. So this is an understanding that the Muhammadan dispensation will be carried over to any prophet who was manifested after Muhammad. So Isa will have that as far as we understand. So I think that breaking the cross and killing the swine are more symbolic expressions that are public. And what's what? When Jesus comes back, that day on CNN, we were all watching it. Whatever is on. I'm sure, unless it's 21:18 and civilizations collapse as we know due to global warming, which could very well be when it happens. But if it happens, it's a big event. I'm sure it'll be on TV.
It'd be cool, like. So it appears that the
So-
Muslims were right.
And because we understand as Muslims that when Jesus comes back, you can't convert. When he comes back, it's like you are where you are. Because there's no iman anymore. It's in your face. There's no faith. It is what it is. That's what I understand is that when he comes back, then that's it. Whatever you believe, you're stuck with it.
This or that, whatever happens.
Because it wants to. That's what the hiddenness of God. God's hiddenness is implicit that it is that we will make a choice intellectually for the hidden God, the unseen God. Because that's I think a challenge God puts out for us, that we make a choice for Him. Because we have to choose God. We can't be forced to believe in God. Because God doesn't, that's His nature, is to be free. That is something we share. I believe that personally. I mean, I take that position. When you see these things in front, it's like that's why the prophet warned his companions, you're in more trouble if you disobey me than anyone else. Because I'm in your face right now. So if you do something against what I have been commanded by God to forbid you to do, or you ignore it, then your penalty is so severe because it's in your face. But later, people who believe because they believe, because whatever evidence they believe, it's different. I mean, if you, for example, today took the things I was sharing with you, and they convicted you more in faith. Let's say in another lecture on the Quran, it convicts you more in faith, and more certitude. Then if you reject outwards, you're even worse off than before you came. Because you already had demonstrative evidence that tried to instill in you an intellectual attachment to intellectually affirm the validity of what you claim to believe in. And then you reject it, and you fall even further. So if you don't want that to happen, don't show up anymore. Unless, of course, the things I share with you make you decrease in faith. Because I don't do it very well.
Shikne, I have a question about something you mentioned earlier about, it's kind of twofold, but the primary one is, in the Syria you get a lot of ideas that there were groups of Christians and Jews that moved into Arabia looking for or waiting for the last prophet. Do you have any, is there any external evidences of that concept of searching for the last prophet?
Anyone have any information on that? I personally do not have a lot of information. Now, in the Islamic tradition, we have in the Sirah narrations of why did the Prophet ﷺ's grandfather name him Muhammad? Because the narration is that among the people, the pagan Arabs, there was an understanding that there would be one named Muhammad who will come as a prophet, and so Abu Talib named his grandson Muhammad. Is that right? Because I'm saying, and because of that, so there were actually a few Muhammads around at his time when he was born, because there was an expectation of this. So we know that from our tradition. As for, Salman al-Farsi, there's his narrative that there was an expectation of a prophet coming from Arabia, but that's a singular Muslim narrative within the Muslim historical narrative. The only way we can confirm that is if we go through, try to find contemporary literature of the time when Salman al-Farsi lived in Ghassan and in that part of southern Syria where he was at, in Bosra, that area, and see if in those communities there actually were any evidence of an expectation. Otherwise, all you have is the Muslim narrative, okay? And that's an in-house narrative. And that's not it's better to find, if you want to support that, it's better to find a document outside your narrative. That's a stronger evidence than something inside your narrative. So, I don't know. Muslims have that idea, but I never read that like any for certain thing about where you are about that,
As a follow-up, the other implication is also that you mentioned about the previous scripture being as it is today, that the description of the prophet was fairly explicit. You get that sometimes in the reading of the Sirah that the Jews could pretty much practically physically describe the prophet based on what they had in their scriptures.
When Muslims narrative are saying the Jews have this, and the Muslim never brings out that, I mean, it doesn't tell me anything. It says that you're saying they had it, but you don't narrate it, you don't quote it, what it was, you don't even give a reference to it. That doesn't say anything. That's not a proof, because you never demonstrated it. I mean, I wouldn't accept that. I mean, I'm not saying that Muslims haven't said that, but if we think about today in this room right now, to me that's not a proof. That's just a Muslim, analysis or expectation or statement. I don't know how you want to call that. That to me doesn't prove anything. It goes to back that internal narrative within the Islamic tradition. Go ahead.
So leaving behind an argument on Islamophobia, but thinking from a perspective of justice, shouldn't God give undeniable proof or evidence to people outside the region that there will be a prophet or there is going to be a prophet so that they can have their salvation? If belief in him is a criteria towards being saved.
Believe in who?
If belief in Prophet Muhammad.
Well, that's a question, because obviously he was a regional person. He was in Arabia, and if you were living in Siam at the time, you would never heard of him. You would not hearing about him. That's a legitimate. That's a big question that goes on all the time among theologians. What about the unsaved? What about those who haven't heard the message? What's their outcome? Muslim scholars have interesting responses. Different ones. Some will say they're excused. Some would say they're partially excused because your intellect should allow you to at least affirm deity of something. I think that those are not. I like the excused one because that's more Quranic, that until God sends you a messenger, you're not going to be judged. There's a verse about that. That's a general one. The one that, you should have the intellectual. If your intellect is intact, you should be able to understand that there is a deity. But I think that's not sufficient because there could be cultural and other things that would keep you from making that choice. Your intellect may be perfectly intact, but you were raised in an environment with the idea of observing the world to come to a conclusion of creator wasn't part of the paradigm you grew up in, so that doesn't pay out with me, you understand what I'm saying with that? So, if you were a Mayan, living in Mesoamerica, and in that environment, would you actually have thought of one God? That even come up on your radar screen? I don't know. Maybe not. You know what I mean? So I think that argument by some Muslim scholars is sort of like wishful thinking argument. It doesn't really pan out with our understanding of real culture and how people actually perceive, how they would come to that conclusion to think of deity in any way. I'm not quite sure that anthropologically or psychologically it's a good argument, personally.
That's a question.
I don't know.
Scientifically, do the story of evolution? Don't they believe two atoms collided together?
Two atoms?
No, I don't even know.
Atoms like Adam that has something to do with
What happened?
the Texas public.
What were the two things that I know? That's exactly. See, this is fine. But why? The very first thing. What's the very first thing that they did that happened that started everything?
That's really off the wall.
No, I'm asking because I've been wondering because if it was two things that came
On
together
your way
and
home,
make
you
up
can
the-
ask him that.
No, wait,
You would
because-
enjoy it.
No, because if you think about it like this,
I'm tired of it, man. It's on.
I'm telling you, hey, Dad. If it was it wasn't two things came together, do something. Wasn't it?
We'll talk about in the car.
No, because I was thinking, because would that be theologian thought of Adam and Eve? Would that be
I see what he's saying.
Do you see what I'm trying to say? Could that
I think
what
it's pushing the
happened?
biblical narrative really,
I could do that.
really elastic.
They believe Jesus is God. I could do that.
Happy theology.
They believe Jesus is God and all that, so I could do that. It's okay.
Brother has a question.
It's more of a historical question. So,
More of a what?
A historical question. Unfortunately, certain Muslims, they have the tendency to undermine the status of the Prophet ﷺ as only as just human, and so they only focus on.
He was just human.
I mean, in the sense that like they don't really focus on his sort of his. I mean, he has certain like
Say it.
supernatural qualities, but they don't like like certain Salafis they don't, or most of them they undermine his status like in a way. So I was wondering if that had anything to do with a reaction to maybe the Christians, I don't know, like overemphasis on outwardly miracles of Jesus or Islam? Or
Yeah, I mean, there's two things there. I mean, I don't think any Muslim out there intentionally seeks to undermine the Prophet. I really don't believe it. I don't care what anyone says at any pulpit, any green dome mosque anywhere. I don't believe Muslims out there intentionally, we must defame the Prophet in order to maintain his integrity. I don't believe there's a discourse out there. I think there's a disagreement. I think that what you said, the second point is, I think, yes, some Muslims want to keep us from shirk, idolatry, so that we want to keep the Prophet human, so we don't put upon him anything which seems extraordinary. Okay, I think that's true. But that gets to the gray zone of what's extraordinary. I mean, the fact that God spoke to you is rather extraordinary. I mean, at the end of the day, the most minimal thing, if God actually spoke to you, or an angel appears and speaks to you, that's pretty extraordinary. It doesn't happen in my neighborhood too often. Not in Kilbriar or in Humble. So maybe, I don't know, I don't believe it does, but I take me on my word for that. So, I don't believe people are intentionally trying to belittle the Prophet. And these points that are brought up, honestly, about this prophetic, these, what you would call supernatural things, is that the word you use? They're not supernatural. They're supra. That they're not our normally experienced things. But the Prophet ﷺ, if we're going to that discussion on the Prophet ﷺ, on these sort of like really deeply metaphysical qualities of him, to be honest, those are not clearly enunciated in the tradition. These are things that are brought out by intellectual effort and analysis that the Prophet must be like this, like this, like this, like that. And trying to read the narrative and saying, well, that must be what he's like. But I think that the believer has to affirm the things that are clearly stated and not necessarily deny the things that may be implicitly true. But don't blame a person who may not agree with your analysis of the things that are not clearly stated. You understand what I'm saying? So if we say the Prophet is Bashar, he was Bashar. That's not wrong. It's not bad. But if I'm going around saying, the Prophet ﷺ was the first thing that God created, was the light of the Prophet ﷺ, that may be true. It may not be true. Because the narrative of that doesn't come to me with the same status as Allah is calling him Bashar, and how I understood that. Now you can argue the historicity and the authenticity of those narratives. But when you have to do that, that means that you've understood there may be a problem with them in the first place. No one has to argue the case of a Quranic verse's authority and authenticity to the average Muslim. But if you have to argue the case that this narrative, that the first thing Allah created was my light, you have to prove it. And that's an extraordinary claim. Because nowhere in the Quran or in a more authentic tradition does the Prophet go around to his people saying, I was the first thing God created, as if it was narrated by 5 people who witnessed it. That would be very strong evidence. But since you don't have that, it's like any issue of classification. You classify something, and then you draw the hukum from it. You don't draw the hukum first and then try to classify it. So, I don't deny certain things with the Prophet. I believe that they're sound, they make sense to me, but I also understand the person who may not agree with me, that he can have a position just as intellectually sound that he doesn't accept at the moment. And if that's the case, as long as it doesn't call the Prophet a liar, I'm not going to be worried about it too much. I mean, when you call the Prophet a liar, then you're no longer a Muslim. But when it comes to the issue of what you accept this narrative as being, someone came the other day and said, Sheikh Naeem, if I read this 40 times at the Fajr, there's a hadith that says, I will see the Prophet. I said, what's the hadith? I said, that's not found in any sound tradition. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm not hedging my bets on it. Because I'll tell you what, if you do it for 40 years and you don't see the Prophet, what are you going to think about that then? Because if you were just told by someone that if you see this, you will see the Prophet. He was all excited about it. And I said, well, I don't know that's very authentic, but I'm just warning you, if you do it for 40 years and you don't see the Prophet, don't lose faith. Because it may be that's not necessarily a sound narration. So I don't know. On these points, that whole debate about prophetic status, and raising him up, or people who apparently are putting him down, I understand the argument, but I don't. You know me, don't get me on that one, because it's like me, it's like if you go to mosque so-and-so, or they read the book of so-and-so, you automatically anathematize them, but that person is a deviant. It's no different than if I walk into a Catholic church. It doesn't make me a deviant or a Catholic. It just meant I was there.
Guilt by association.
I mean, it's guilt by association. And that's not the case. You don't go around labeling takfir or deviation until only a judge can do that. And it's a case-by-case thing. And then you say, if a person believes such, such, and such, and such, that is an act of deviation. And just because someone is associated with a certain group doesn't mean he believes it. And that's our problem, is we're so easy to not see things that way. Because it's so much easier to anathematize and takfirize people than it is to accept them or any type of thing. It's easier to do that because you feel better that way. You understand what I'm saying? You feel comfortable making that person a kafir. Does it make you feel good about yourself? You have to deal with them. We be very careful about that. So, yes, some of the neo-Salafis, they do seem to, want to. That's their minhaj. We're worried about shirk. We don't want for people to worship God the wrong way or to think of the Prophet as non-human, because they are saying some Muslims are making the Prophet non-human. But I've never heard a Muslim make the Prophet non-human, no matter how many interesting things I've heard about the Prophet. They always say he's still human. Have you ever met a Muslim who said the Prophet was Allah? I've never met that. But you've heard someone say the Prophet was the first thing God created, but that doesn't make you Allah. It just makes you the first thing God created.
I saw someone like Superman.
Now, Superman doesn't make you a God. It just means you're outside the norm. But I think that a traditional Sunni Islam affirms certain things of the Prophet's nature. I mean, I don't care. It's not a Braillery thing. It's a real Sunni thing. It really is. When you look at traditional works throughout the Muslim world and the Sunni tradition, some of these things that are with the Braillery camp have always been there. They're there. And this whole reaction against it is a relative thing since the mid-1800s. Things like that. It's a reactionary thing. That's just because Islam's going through this whole reactionary phase of Protestantization and all that.
Dark Ages.
Anyway, that's it for today. One last question.
As you were giving quotes from Old Testament, do you see any mentioning of coming of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as in it, in any verses, as people can do comparative religious studies and say, what so and so tells they coming about,
I think that personally, for me, I've never honestly read any really worked out analysis in the text that I felt was a really surefire case. Really haven't. I mean, there's this book here, maybe I brought it there, that one there about Jesus and Messiah, but maybe it gets into some of those discussions about, for example, Ismu Ahmed, for example. So people are looking around to find this word Ahmed. Well, of course they're not going to find it, right? Because it's Arabic. And so they try to find some equivalent. But I always say, and I told the guys yesterday at this madrasa, I said, it's how you read that phrase in Arabic. Ismu Ahmed could be Ismuhu, and then Ahmed is what's called badal, or it's explaining the positive. Basically it's saying, what is the name? Ahmed. That's one way to read it. The other one is you read it as a nominal sentence. His name is most praised. When you look for something where it means his name is most praised, and Jesus said, I inform you in the good news of a prophet after me whose name is praised. That makes more sense. Why? Because that is the Prophet's name. Muhammad is the one that's praised a lot. So you're not looking for a name, you're looking for one who will be praised. And even his name is that which is praised a lot. That's a much more logical reading than look for a man in those scriptures looking for the word Ahmed, or try to find some, or try to tweak an Aramaic statement, or something in Aramaic, or find like Parakletos. That big argument about the Paraclete. Well, it must have been the original one wasn't Parakletos, it was Parakletos. And they changed it. Come on, man. It's like, not only is it you didn't find the right word, now you're trying to say the Christian, you're giving the alternative that they've changed it or was corrupted. And when you have no proof for it. You're trying to, squeeze this, trying to push this square peg in a hole, make it fit. Just because you can't find anything else to do. That's because you're trying to find a literal reading. Well, don't look for a literal reading. Look for the clear, obvious reading in the Quran, which is a name that will be praised by people. And what one name in the world, post-Jesus, of one man who claimed to be a prophet, whose own name was given to him by his grandfather before he was born. When he was born, he didn't name himself so he could contrive it. Was Muhammad, a very strange name, which means a very praised one. And then he claims to be a prophet later on, and his name is around the world, for minarets around the world. That's a sounder argument than looking for Ahmed in an old scripture.
So, can we get the verse, the number of the verse, where it says that Jesus...
It's Surah Saf.
Oh.
Surah Saf, I don't know what ayat it is.
No, I mean in Bible or...
There is none.
Oh, there is none. Okay.
So now you ask, okay, that's the Quranic, my response to that Quranic reading.
Okay, that's it.
Now let's say, in the Bible, is there something, as far as I know, where Jesus, in some narrative, is proclaiming that Muhammad ﷺ in some way that I know?
They would have rewrote the book if there was.
No, I'm not. No, I don't get these conspiracy theories.
They would have. Anything wrong with the book, they would have rewrote the book.
The only time they would rewrite the book is the post event. After it's happened, they rewrite it in order to try to deny it. Not before it happens. They don't know what's going to happen, so no one's going to rewrite something.
But keep adding more to it almost every time.
Then you go back into your speculation.
That's true. They do. I bet you they still want to add things to it.
I can look into that if you want me to. I mean, I've read stuff around hand. I don't get into that. I mean, if you, I'm not Shabir Ali here who gets up there, goes off, and patiently talks to Christians and memorizes all these Bible verses to prove a point. That's not my thing. I don't need to do that. I don't do that. I mean, I think it's really hokey. I don't need that fetish, That's nice. I grew up all the 80s. Big hair, I'll do that. That's the 80s. Go ahead.
One question, Jay. So if you want to take this argument as a logical converse, saying that was there a definitive proof from their perspective that there will be no prophet after Jesus?
No, there isn't, because this is interesting. Part of the idea of the messianic expectation as it developed was, and this is in the Gospel of John, is that they ask him, are you the Messiah? Are you Elijah? Or are you the prophet? There was an expectation of a prophet to come, and that would be a unique prophet. This is definitely in the Gospel of John. Oops. So I think that narrative, because if you ask Christians, who is this prophet? They still don't have an answer for it. And there's only one person in history who goes around commonly. If you go around talking to people in religion, who was the prophet? It always comes, Muhammad's name will come first. Because he's known as the prophet. Get it? I mean, it's like a common usage. The prophet, usually you're referring to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's an interesting one in the Gospel of John, that they were expecting a prophet. Now some say that prophet is the one like Moses. And then that goes back then to a lawgiver prophet, because that's also a commentary to that. So then you can maybe develop an argument for that. But if you're saying, for example, a name, I don't know of one, and I don't want to play that, because I think that when you as Muslims try to go around and try to tweak it out, we just lose our credibility. We don't need to do that. We need to follow these 3 proofs of a prophet, those 3 tests, and ask ourselves honestly, does Muhammad meet those 3 tests? If he can meet those 3 tests, by definition, he must be a prophet. Now, whether you accept him or not, that's your choice. Right, because Jesus fulfilled those criteria, and the Jews rejected him. And they reject him some today. They say he's a false Messiah. He's a false prophet. He was deluded. So, I mean, it's that, either you want to. I met a Jewish rabbi who believed Muhammad was a prophet. He really did. I believe, from all I know, that Muhammad was a prophet. And I said, well, why don't you follow him? Why don't you Muslim? He said, because I also believe that God gave Israelites a promise. So the Jews, one of the reasons, if you talk to a Jew, it's easier for a Jew to be a Muslim than for a Christian. But why do many Jews not? Because they will say, God made us a covenantal promise. And that promise, as they read through Scripture, is until the end of time. So they don't feel they have to step out of that covenant. But that also leads to a conundrum. If he was a prophet of the God who made the covenant with you, you have to ask yourself, what does that mean to you? Because then you're like saying, you're denying his prophethood. Because by not following him, and he says, if you're a Jew or a Christian and you hear what God gave me and deny it, and let him find that you find your sitting place in hell, that's not a pleasant rebuttal of the man, in the sense of you're rejecting him. So that's a dangerous thing to do, I think, for someone like that, because I think that, you don't have to give up. You're not giving up your tradition. I mean, the purpose is, at the end of the day, is God, not a tradition. We all have to understand our objective is God, not the form that we get to God. If God has clearly communicated and you can intellectually affirm that, then you must then take the next course, is conform to that new dispensation. And I think that's what we want to share with people, is that that. Let's give you some things to think about. If Muhammad was a true prophet, I think we gave you stuff today to help you sort of start placing yourself to understand that we can argue cases about these ridiculous claims against the Prophet ﷺ. We can argue cases to defend his character, his actions. But at the end of the day, the ultimate thing is, are you able to demonstrate a case that he must have been a prophet? That's something you should be able to try to do. And if you can do that, you're well and good prepared to deal with people. But there's 2 things to do that: intellectually and by your character. Have a good intellectual argument that is sound. You can answer, you can respond back to their problems, and be a good person. Just be, smile and lots of biryani and and have certitude. Don't be a Muslim who says, inshallah, things will be okay. Yes, things will be okay. Things are always good with God. Believers will be in paradise. We only say inshallah because we know at any moment we can reject God. Believers are in paradise. But the only reason a Muslim says inshallah is because you never know at each breath whether you will renew your faith or you will reject God. That's why you say inshallah. Not that you doubt God's promise for believers. It's because you don't know whether you'll believe tomorrow. Do you know if you're going to believe tomorrow? Do you have a guarantee you'll believe tomorrow? None of us have a guarantee. You can walk away from Islam just like that. People do it every day. Just like that, walk away.
It's like that Hadith, right? They'll be in arms like the way from
Yeah.
paradise.
And, the Prophet said that one of the signs of Yom Qiyamah is that in the morning people wake up with Iman, and eating they're kafir. And in the evening some are kafir, and in the morning they're believers. They flip-flop. So, I mean, you never know. That's why we say in the Fatiha, we are constantly calling Allah to keep us in guidance. Because the further you get away from the time of the Prophet, the more easier it is to abandon it. Because what is there to remind you? Look at today, to be a Muslim today. You got people, you know, who are, you know, even to be a Muslim means that you're some type of subversive fifth column in the West. You know? The whole report there about the police in Miami, you know, on the news about how they are intentionally, you know, they've been, no, it was in New York City. In New York City was a report about police in New York that one thing they do now is a general policy, spoken or unspoken, is that they observe Muslims. That's not a positive thing. I don't want to become a Muslim and then be, you know, worried that the FBI will come to my door. But every person who wants to think of becoming a Muslim has to consider that, don't they?
Yeah.
That they're going to be considered a traitor, a fifth column person in their community. Think about that.
Because they're afraid.
That's a different issue. People are right to be afraid because
They're already afraid because they know that if Islam grows, their way of life is going to be gone. And no, it's true because it's true. It's what's going to happen.
I didn't say that.
No, I don't care. I'm not scared. They can come to my door. I'm American.
That's FBI getting in.
I'm American. They can come pull me over whenever they want. You know, I was born in America and I want to stay in America. They're just afraid because if everyone in America becomes a Muslim, things got to change. But when things change, politics aren't happy. You know, because their pocket's gonna be like, oh man, look at these people, they're changing. We gotta do something about this. You know, so what do they
They should
do?
give you a pulpit at the masjid.
No, then what are they gonna do, Dad? They're gonna do the one thing they can do, is try to like
Orange
make everyone-
jumpsuit, like
This
Guantanamo.
is- I walk around with a jumpsuit and say, I'm a Muslim and I'm proud. You can't change me.
I can't change. Yes, I can.
Well, what that black guy in that one movie said to himself, they could change my body, but they can't
Malcolm
change my.
X?
No, when the prophet was around.
Oh, Bilal.
Yeah, what did he say? They can change my body, but they can't change my soul.
Wow.
He said that. He said they can change my body, but they can't change my soul. That's what every Muslim has to believe.
Yeah, every Muslim wants to believe that, but every Muslim doesn't have the faith to believe
You don't
that.
need like a whole bunch of faith to believe it. You don't need a whole bunch of faith to believe it.
In this day-
You just have to have. You don't even need faith. You just have to have moral in yourself. Do you believe that someone is above you, besides God? Another man is above you. If you believe that, then you aren't worthy of being a man. Because if you think another man is above you and better than you, then you don't deserve to be a man. That's just it, right then and there. Because God told us every man is equal, besides, well, the prophet maybe a bit more. Maybe a bit more. But every man, like you and I, are equal. And if another man thinks that, then, you know, he's wrong. You don't even have to argue about it. You know, stupid as stupid does, and we chose not to be stupid.
You still have to follow your dad's
Memorable
rules.
quote from Muslim Youth of America. Okay.
And Christians can't say the same thing. All they can say is, well, salvation is all I got. And that's what's going to doom you in the end, buddy. Well, we'll see, you know. When he comes back with the Quran in his hand, he can be like, oh, Lord. Oh, Lord, again, he was wrong. Kill the swine and go pray or do something Muslims do.
No comment. Okay, guys, so that's it. I have to drive home tonight.